Thank you, sir. Dr. Barbara, I just have a few questions that others have raised for me to ask you about. First of all, you suggested that Dr. Cleghorn was a visionary because he recognised that rather than being a nuisance that you had to get round, he was aware that transfusion-transmitted infections would become an increasing problem. To what extent did other directors of regional transfusion centres feel that dealing with transfusion-transmitted infections was a nuisance to get around?
Well, I think that the obvious expertise in blood transfusion was a hematological one. And I'm not sure that all the other directors, at least in the early days, recognized the potential significance and risk to patient safety that blood-borne agents might pose. So, again, I'm probably being somewhat flippant in my comments, and I apologize for that. But I think that there wasn't the recognition of the significance and the impact that things might have. And then one thinks about HIV and the concerns of variant CJD. And yes, I'd stick to my choice of word as visionary. I think that over time, all transfusion directors did recognize the importance. And I wouldn't want to dilute that. But no, for me, Tom Cleghorn could see it very clearly. And of course, that was in part because of his close association with Dr. David Dane.
Could we have CBLA 5043_040, please? Professor Barbara, this isn't a document that was specifically flagged to you in advance, but I'm not going to ask you about the detail in it. Given the significant contact you had with PHLS and CDSC, were you aware of this letter sent by Spence Galbraith on the 9th of May 1983 to the Department of Health and Social Security? Let me read to you just the core section of it. It indicates that Spence Galbraith had, thank you, a case of the acquired immune deficiency syndrome in a haemophiliac in Cardiff who'd received USA factor VIII concentrate was reported. He then identifies that he's reviewed the literature, and this is the part I want to highlight to you. I've reviewed the literature and come to the conclusion that all blood products made from blood donated in the USA after 1978 should be withdrawn from use until the risk of AIDS transmission by these products has been clarified. I just want to ask you, Professor Barbara, whether you were aware of this letter at that time.
No, I wasn't aware of it.
Moving on then to non-A, non-B hepatitis, I'm asked to explore with you whether you ever tested your views on the clinical severity of non-A, non-B against the views of hepatology colleagues who were dealing with the effects of it from a clinical perspective.
Yes, I understand the relevance of that. I suppose we tended to live in slightly different worlds, and we were aware and became increasingly aware at symposia and seminars of the concerns of clinical colleagues. I think to some extent, myself and others in the blood service would have taken a view that if you spend your working day dealing with a particular condition, then you tend to think that that condition is prevalent everywhere. So I think I'd have to say that we didn't really test those views against our clinical colleagues. We did have in mind what they said and became increasingly aware of the actual relevance of a, I believe, small but real proportion of cases of infection.
Do you agree with Professor Contreras' evidence that if there'd been some sort of central advice from the Chief Medical Officer, this may have assisted you in having earlier understanding of the significance of the risk of non-A, non-B hepatitis?
Yes, I could see the benefit of that. Yeah, yes.
Can we turn then to NHBT 307639, please? These are minutes of the working group on microbiology held on the 15th of January 1988. And if we go over to the second page, please, we have paragraph 2.3. And the minutes record, there's also a need for a central authority, body, institution to collect and coordinate information on and give guidance on quality control matters. Such a centre could record and provide information on data on supplies and quality of products in various RTCs, on reactions and diseases, e.g. malaria, developing in recipients of blood, blood components or plasma fraction products. Advice on special matters such as how to take blood from infected persons could be provided. It's not clear at present where the responsibility for checking the quality of blood packs or for the quality of bulk plasma lies. In large measure, this must be at the transfusion centres where plasma is collected, but the plasma fractionation centres had also to check their bulk source material in whatever respects were possible. In relation to the suggestion that there was a need for a central authority, etc., to collect and coordinate information, including on reactions and diseases that were developing, can you confirm that there was nobody or group that carried out that function centrally at that time?
No, I believe there was not.
What can you recall about North London's practice, if any, of informing the CDSC about post-transfusion hepatitis cases?
From when I started, again, because of the clear advice from Dr. Dane, I would provide an annual report of our investigations in conjunction with the Middlesex on investigations into post-transfusion infection. And I would send a copy of this report to, I believe then it was Dr. Sheila Polikoff at CDSC. So this would be a regular and recognized exchange of information.
What then would have been the benefits, do you think, of having a central body or group collecting and coordinating that information?
I suppose that procedure could have been rolled out on a national basis with a consistent approach across all blood centres.
And with the benefit of hindsight, do you think such a national body, centralised body, would have led to improved data and understanding on a national basis of the incidence of post-transfusion hepatitis?
I think with hindsight, it might well have done. I notice it covers quality control matters, and I must mention that NIBSC, the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control, also provided analyses of our routine QC test results on our tests for all agents, and we would get monthly reports on this. And again, there would be seminars that were organised by NIBSC. Dr. Ferguson, Dr. Morag Ferguson, and myself, excuse me, used to arrange these jointly. So there was the developed and improved national quality control coordination.
We looked at a letter earlier that you co-wrote with Professor Contreras to The Lancet in August 1989, in which you referred to the UK donor population as being a low prevalence population in relation to non-A, non-B hepatitis. It's a point we've discussed a few times at Professor Barbara, but I've been asked to clarify whether your reference to a low prevalence population was simply based on the low rate of post-transfusion hepatitis reports that you received.
Yes, I suppose it must have been mainly due to that, and probably because of a feeling that there was a low incidence of reported cases of non-A, non-B in the general population.
And finally, in relation to the hepatitis C assays, following your assessment in 1989 that the tests of the assays constituted a welcome advance over surrogate markers, was any thought given to using the first generation of assays in conjunction with surrogate testing?
I don't believe there was.
Thank you. Just going to look behind me. So there are no further questions that I've been asked to put to Professor Barbara. Is there anything so that you want to raise?
Yes. Really at two ends almost of the time spectrum, but the first in relation to hepatitis B. And given your interest in microbiology and virology and your knowledge of Dr. Dane, you may be able to help with this. When the screening test for hepatitis B was introduced in 1972, the first generation anyway of the tests had, as I understand it, a reputation of not being particularly accurate. Is that fair or not?
The immunodiffusion assays, Sir Brian, were accurate in as much as they provided a built-in confirmation by looking at the way the immunoprecipitin lines formed and whether you got lines of identity excuse me, with new reactive samples, but it wasn't particularly sensitive. So I think I would say it was accurate but not sensitive.
So it missed a number of cases?
Yes.
And that went on through in 1975, was it the RIA test or came in, or maybe the RHPA?
Or the hemagglutination test.
Yes.
If I may say, the sequence was, initially it was immunodiffusion, and then an electric current was passed across the gel, and you got what was called end-osmoimmunophoresis, which was like immunodiffusion, but it made it faster, which of course helped in the very manual testing, the routine screening for release of blood within a half day. And I think it was slightly more sensitive. Then hemagglutination tests came in. then radioimmunoassay came in, and then the ELISAs came in because of concerns of using radioactivity, iodine 125.
And at what stage did it manage to reach the level of universal or pretty universal detectability, the improved sensitivity of the test?
Well, again, from memory, the hemagglutination test, actually, especially the enhanced hemagglutination test that I developed and that most centers in the country took up, would have detected between 90 and say 93% of positives. So then the radioimmunoassay would have detected from sort of 93 to 97, 98%. So it was a very sensitive test, and the ELISAs similarly. But then, of course, with PCR, you were able to detect practically everything, unless it was very early in the window period. And with any viral infection, there is a phase called the eclipse, where no test is going to be positive, but given a donation given by the pint, as it were, such a large volume of inoculum, there may have been some residual infectivity. So it was a gradual and steadily improving process, and it was lovely to see how the sensitivity could increase. And of course, when we had the availability of seroconversion panels, we could measure very accurately the sensitivity of the different tests and the tests from different manufacturers. And again, that was so gratifying, because it just made you sleep easier when you knew that your day's testing was going to be really much more reliable.
Thank you. The second part, the second end of the spectrum, as it were, which I want to ask you about, is in respect of hepatitis C. My understanding is that the cloning of the hepatitis, the sequencing of the genome of the virus, was first told to the world in a press release in 1988, in 10th of May 1988. Now, you won't remember the date, I'm quite sure, but you might remember the event. It was some time after that before the details, I think, were published. At the same time as it was suggested, there was an assay which the Chiron Corporation had available for use to detect the virus. What was the reaction, your reaction first, and secondly, the reaction of those around you to the announcement that there was a claim, at any rate, that whatever it was that was causing the large proportion of non-A, non-B hepatitis had been found and identified?
So virologists' equivalent of joy, Sir Brian, and a relief as well that at last this elusive and nebulous agent — I don't normally like American phrases because they're clumsy, but non-A, non-B absolutely described what it was. It wasn't A, it wasn't B, we didn't know what it was. And here was clear evidence from Harvey Alter's very testing panel of samples that when the Chiron assay, or the partners also who produced the ELISA, when they ran this, there was such a predictive value in the assay for those samples, which were going to be, of course, a high proportion were going to be really HCV positive. And yeah, it was great relief that from this sort of side field approach of cloning, there had come an assay that was going to really get a handle on this condition, non-A, non-B hepatitis.
What do you recollect happening in the period between the press announcement that it had been discovered and it was very nearly a year later, I think, that the
Yes,
actual details were published? What was happening in that period of time? What was the community doing?
I think that Chiron Corporation would have been confirming those findings. Of course, companies like to do a press release to generate interest, but for scientists, they would have wanted to be rock solidly sure that that was real. Then they would have been trying to formulate assays that were going to be robust, reliable, as sensitive as possible, as specific as possible. And of course, there would have been trials of any reagents produced. So this would have been what was going on in that time. And, you know, the scientific and medical community would have just said, well, we'll have to wait because we know these things do take time.
So you would have known it was coming.
We'd have known that a test, once you cloned an antigen, we would have known that that would eventually form the basis of some sort of assay.
And you would think it was probably a credible press release because it had, amongst other things, I think it mentioned the name of Harvey Alter.
Yes. Harvey, of course, his panel was instrumental in validating the validity of that. So that was a press release I could have believed in, yes.
So, to what extent do you think part of the delay may have been the patenting by Chiron Corporation of an assay which could then be sold around the world?
I think that could have been a considerable part because the patent was absolutely rock solid, and it in effect blocked anyone from doing any research that wasn't based on their clone. So one of the concerns we had was that there could be other variants, and we know about viral variants these days. But the whole assay was based on this one particular variant, if you liked. And we were concerned that the patent was so solid that it would block further progress. And if I may just add, when myself, Peter Glazebrook, Richard Tedder patented the, if you like, British HCV assay that Wellcome Diagnostics produced, we'd hoped that there would be leeway for that to be used because that clone contained a structural antigen, and that assay, although it was the first generation of that assay, was actually more specific than the first generation ortho assay, which didn't have any structural antigens. But in the event, the patent court found against us, which I suppose with the nature of the patent was almost inevitable.
Yes, so the market in effect was cornered, was it?
Absolutely, sir.
And
absolutely topped up.
And having been cornered, I suppose that Ortho, whose test by then it was, would have expected to sell it around the world, I suppose.
Yes. And they only, if I may digress, they only licensed other companies to produce HCV antibody assay based on the Chiron clone if those other manufacturers had some sort of hold on Ortho. So if they had licensed something to Ortho, they would expect to have the HCV assay cross-licensed to them. So you had UBI and you had Sanofi Pasteur, but Wellcome didn't have any such thing. So there was no bargaining power in that aspect. It also meant that they could charge a price that was at least 4 times greater than any of the other routine screening assays that we were able to negotiate in the UK.
Yes.
Sorry, you've triggered emotions, Sir Brian.
No, well, I can see that. But I suppose it leads to the next question, which was, if that was the case, and if in, I think it was April 1989, that the test and the assay was announced or published in Science, and therefore known to be available, and the methodology was understood, there was a test which could have been used.
Yes.
It wasn't a question of someone saying, look, we've just found as it was with HIV, we've found the virus, now we're going to find a test for it. The test was, as it were, ready-made.
When that was announced, yes, 89, and I know a lot of countries started it in 1990, but as I have laid out and my colleagues have laid out, our concerns were the prediction, which was borne out of the poor specificity because of the cell line used and the antiglobulin format, which lent itself to false positives, and the lack of the confirmatory test. But yes, there was a test.
Yes, thank you. That's all that I have to ask. It may be that some questions arise out of that, Ms. Razor-Butlin. I don't know.
I don't think we've had anything. No, sir.
You?
Professor Barber, is there anything else you would like to add?
Sorry, me.
Yes, Professor Barber, is there anything else you would like to add before we finish?
In relation to the whole session?
Indeed.
Or anything that you want to say. We always give every witness as an opportunity to say whatever they may feel moved to say at the end of the evidence which they've given.
If I may then, if you'll forgive me from reading out a statement.
No, go ahead.
So I would like to finish by saying that I've tried to the best of my ability to assist the inquiry on behalf of infected blood recipients and those who have been adversely affected. The only goal of myself and my colleagues was to help patients who might require blood as best we could. As a lifelong blood donor, accredited with more than 250 donations of blood and platelets, this too reflects my goal to help patients. Naturally, I completely sympathize with any recipients of blood who have been harmed by transfusion of blood components or products. I deeply regret the suffering or harm caused to patients and their families by any inadequacies in the provision of what was intended to be life-saving or life-enhancing transfusions. I would have wished that this inquiry could have happened sooner. This would have enabled the inadvertently but tragically harmed patients to have some redress and justice for what happened to them. During the course of the inquiry, the injury they have suffered has been made so movingly clear. I wish it could have been possible for me to attend the inquiry in person, and I very much hope that my evidence will have helped the inquiry along the path to completing its crucially important work.
It has most certainly helped. It helps us enormously to have different perspectives, because there are different perspectives on what took place. And yours is if it isn't unique, it's very close to being unique, as being the only microbiologist in a regional transfusion centre employed as such for many years. And the insight which you've given from that particular point of view, it's absolutely plain that you're devoted to your subject and to the science of it. It's very good of you to be prepared to give us the benefit of that, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Pleasure, sir.
And I hope that it hasn't been too painful an experience, and that your neck is, as it were, warming up a bit.
Thank you for that.
Tomorrow, sir, we hear from Dr. McClelland.
Yes, and that's which Dr. McClelland?
Brian McClelland.
Thank you.
The Scottish Dr. Brian McClelland.
So Dr. Brian McClelland, tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.